Hey guys, welcome to Tues Night Bible Study through the book of Ephesians, verse by verse. We are doing a slow crawl, as we say, really unpacking Ephesians. And let me just say this, that Ephesians is a letter, and we say the books of the Bible just generically. The other books of the Bible, most of the books, I should say, are narrative form, meaning this that they're written as a narrative, some stories or whatever they're teaching about. That's why I often say that chapter and verse are not inspired. They were added to the text um, centuries after the writings. Okay, so for that reason, I think as a habit, somewhere in your study habits, reading habits, you should just read and ignore as much as possible the verses and chapter headings, because they're in crazy places. So um so we're going through the letter to Ephesians, and we're in chapter 3. When we're done with chapter 3, we're going to cross over, or there's going to be a shift in the book, and we'll get to that as you get more practical, everyday instructions for Christians. And it's going to be probably a little different than what you think. Okay, but anyway, we'll deal with that as we go. Um, we left off with Paul talking about. Remember, we're in chapter 3 where he has been talking about the mystery of the mystery of the mystery of Christ. He's teaching and then explaining the mysteries of Christ. We said that word mystery was something hidden, a hidden truth that wasn't revealed in the past generations. That so when you read Matthew, Acts, when you read Malachi, First Samuel, okay, Exodus, okay, the entire anything before the time of Paul, when you read when you read those letters, when you read those books, you are not reading and understanding the mystery because it wasn't revealed. So as New Testament believers, it's imperative we understand that, which a lot of people don't. That they don't put together the revelation that Paul was given and of who we are in Christ. And that's the important thing. Who are we in Christ? And there are a lot of things about the New Testament that is there's a lot of things about the New Testament that is revelatory. And one of the most, and I've seen this from time to time, different churches, that they try to use the values of the Old Testament. Even now, think about this, one of the political hot buttons, of the day, the social gospels. That like now people say they want to put the Ten Commandments in public schools. Back in the 60s, they had the Ten Commandments. You said the Pledge of Allegiance. When I was a boy in school, we said the Pledge of Allegiance. We didn't have prayer in school. but we said the Pledge of Allegiance. But there are people who want to put the Pledge of Allegiance. There are people who want to put the Ten Commandments, and they just won't work. And there's a lot of reasons why they won't work. Because if you're going to put the Ten Commandments in there, how do you govern covetous, not coveting your neighbor's things? What do you do about stealing? Well, there are already laws about stealing, right? Murder. What about adultery? We don't enforce the adultery. Now, at one time it was a law. There was a time when if you committed adultery, and certainly adultery plays a big part in divorces now, but not a part of, I mean, so how do you regulate that? But from a believer's perspective, now, point of view, there is understanding that we should know that we should, that Paul gives us how to navigate in this life. This is going to be important when we get into, as I said earlier, chapters 4 on the practical living. And that's, like I say, I'll deal with that when we get there. Let me go to the chapter, and so that we can understand this, we're going to talk about principalities and powers. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about what's going on in the spiritual realm, because that needs to be understood. Okay, that needs to be understood. Again, how we navigate through life. And like I say, I'm just going to deal with it. And let's just get to it. Let me share my screen here. And as usual, we're going to have to kind of deal with sort of the cray-cray. And I'll get to that in a moment. But chapter 3, Ephesians chapter 3, I'm picking up at verse 8. He says, "This grace was given to me, the least of all the saints, to proclaim to the Gentiles the incalculable riches of the Messiah, and to shed light for all about the administration of the mystery hidden for ages in God who created all things." So again, this is an incredible truth, an incredible revelation, because he's going to tell us, one of the things that science is very, very little tidbits that they're learning about life, the origins of life. Okay. Now, their knowledge is corrupted because of their atheist influence on their minds. In other words, their starting point is that God doesn't exist. So that's their starting point. God doesn't exist. So now you have to create a fake science. Now there's real science, but a lot of it is fake science, because think about it. To say that the universe is 14 billion years old, that's a guess. At this point, it's not a workable theory, and it's not a workable theory because you can't prove it. And of course, you could tell us anything. We can't prove it. I can't prove it. How do you go back and measure 15 years? And there's the way that they say that they do color schemes and all that, right? In the word light. And so they kind of think that, well, if a light, and I'm not going to get into that, because seriously, I'm too ignorant to kind of engage that. So it's silly for me to try to. But they do have a way that they say that. I'm saying it doesn't always to me make sense. And when I say make sense, to kind of add up. If your starting point is that God doesn't exist, now you come up with natural selection. You come up with Big Bang. That's your starting point. And of course, you have to then ignore other factors, other valid questions. You have to say, you can't discuss what were the ingredients of combustion that caused the Big Bang. And they tell you, we don't know, which means then they are the ones that had to have been there all along. That if you think about the universe that's expanding, right? The universe that's expanding. And if you look at this screen right here, imagine that's the universe, and then look at beyond the screen, what's out there, because the universe is expanding into something. There's something there that the universe have to expand. We know this, that this is iced tea here, or Snapple, okay? That I put this in the freezer. What happens when water, when the water turns to ice? It expands into this cup. Well, what happens when it expands too much? It explodes, right? The ice, boom, pops out. Unless it's so powerful that it can't explode into it, right? So the universe is expanding into something. Now, of course, obviously we don't know, because we're just not even a speck in terms of the vastness of the universe. But they know God didn't do it. Then, of course, when you think about the universe and only one blue ball that has life, that's all, and all this vastness, all they can see is, and I can tell you then that just the same way that you would explain how all of the elements of creation are here, all of that, you can explain all of the elements of creation are here, that natural selection started selecting how we were going to be formed. Why couldn't natural selection? Because all of the ingredients are all over the universe. So why didn't natural selection form on different planets? Not Earth life, but Martian life. They have all kinds of agreement. Jupiter. We can go on and on and on. Venus, life that would be indigenous to the very extreme hot temperatures of Venus. Well, again, then you come on this planet here, that natural selection decided that in order for us to live, we have to eat. That's what natural selection decided. Just cells don't need to eat, but these bodies need to eat. So then natural selection had to choose a mouth. But then natural selection thought, oh, wait a minute now, you need teeth to process food. So we need a million more years. Now let's give them teeth. Well, wait a minute. Oh, natural selection then had to come up with, you need saliva to help digest the food. All of this, they know God didn't do it, but they certainly say natural selection do it. And when they explain that, they always explain that without the detail. That natural selection, you have to be able to say that natural selection decided that we needed 5 fingers, which I'm glad, 5 toes on one foot for nice balance. Natural selection said, you know what, you need eyes. You need not just one eye, but 2 eyes that see in color. Natural selection decided that, you know what, you need to reproduce yourself. Natural selection decided that. So you have to reproduce. So let's now select that life reproduce itself. Natural selection decided all this. Natural selection decided that when it comes to man, we're going to give them some pleasure. Male and female, pleasure. That in this reproduction, let's make it feel good for them. But we know God didn't do it. All right, so what I'm saying is that now there are mysteries that, to understand. You know, the mysteries that as we kind of look. Now, there's another mystery that we're going to get into that Paul is going to mention, and then later we'll get into it in more depth. So verse 8 again, he says, the grace was given to me that the least of all the saints to proclaim the Gentiles the incalculable riches of the Messiah, and to shed light for all about the administration of the hidden mystery for ages in God who created all things. So there are a lot of these truths in this mystery that Paul is going to reveal. Not detail of everything, but we're going to know some things. Verse 10, he says, so this is so, now get this, the multifaceted wisdom may now be made known through the church to the rulers and authorities in the heavens. And this is where we left off. So the rulers and authorities in the church. Now, if you're reading the Old Testament, that phrase doesn't appear other than a reference to Satan. In the Old Testament, Satan is known as just that, Satan. We get a glimpse of Satan, his abilities, his powers, in the book of Job. We get a glimpse of it in Genesis chapter 3. We see, so when he says the authorities, and this is the whole thing now, the rulers and authorities in the heavens. So this is some revelation we need to understand. Why do people act the way they act? Okay. Now, and then not only that, but here's some revelation that Paul has given us. That part of the revelation of this mystery is to make known through the church to these rulers and authorities in the heavens. God is making known his wisdom. That's part of the wisdom. Now he says multifaceted. Okay, multifaceted. So there are a lot of things about God's wisdom we don't know. He did not reveal. I'll say this too. The Bible, there's a lot of things about the Bible that people don't know. One, because it's not written to just anyone. Now, I was just watching a video, and this person is an atheist, and when it comes to things like politics and stuff, he's a young kid too. And then so he was being featured by another young atheist. And they come up with these little videos that they think is cute. They think is smart. So they come up with these videos like, one of the things he was saying that the Christian God is cruel. Okay, the Christian God is cruel. So they list all of the scriptures where God commands death, the death penalty, where God instructed Israel to, wipe out entire villages, nations, kill everyone, beasts, women, and children. And that's so in the Bible. And so from their perspective, and they cherry pick because they never just pose those Old Testament verses with the New Testament ones. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him will not perish but have everlasting life. And then, of course, you have to talk about why did he give the Son? Why are you not perishing if you believe in the Son that God gave because he loved? They don't talk about that. So they cherry pick in the Old Testament as if that's an indictment to say, this is the reason why I reject God. But I'm going to do a little sidebar here. Let's follow your logic. He's still God. The fact that he's still God, you said the God, well, that God said he created all things. That God said, that God said that you will stand before him. Now, we all have authority structures in the earth, one form or another. We all answer to some form of authority structure, which means we don't always agree or like the authority structure. Okay? That we don't always agree or like the authority structure. Think about that. So, what do you do then? If you are, even the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who has an insane amount of money, he's approaching $1 trillion. He's on track to be the first trillionaire. That's an insane amount of money. I don't even know if we can fathom how much money that is. If you had 1 billion, you're good. If you had 50 million, you're good in terms of life. If you had 100 million, you're good. If you had $100 million, you could certainly live the rest of your life, in extreme luxury. Private jets and all that kind of stuff, houses around. And so just think, if you have $1 billion, the money that you would have. And then, of course, if you have now in that kind of money, but think about this. To a degree, he has to answer to somebody. Maybe not a lot of people, with the money he has, but some people. But we all have authority structure. And that's my point. We all have authority structures. If you want to work for Elon Musk, you have to go by his structure. And trust me, you're not going to agree or like every decision that he makes. So now your point is that unless you're him, see, Elon Musk right now can check out of life. He can say, you know what, screw everybody else. Like he did when the president first got in, which I always knew it was going to be short-lived. But I truthfully, I don't know why, other than he can never be president, but certainly why he he went in and was part of the presidency. That part, and he could say, you know what, I don't need to take this, and boom, leave. He could probably, he had enough money, he could probably buy, now he could personally probably buy a country and then run it. Anyway, I'm drifting too far off here. But here's my point. He doesn't have to abide by, let's say, the world's system, the world's government. This man had enough money to literally create his own world. Okay. But if you want to operate on the world standard structure, he has to. He has to. So even he would have to. So my point is, we all have to. So now, what do? When we get to that point that we have to submit to that, we do. We submit for whatever reason and purpose that we have. If I want to work for Elon Musk, I got to abide by his rules, whether I like them or not. So let's just take a scenario. If I'm working for Elon Musk, and let's say I'm a never Trumper, would I quit my job because he went, he was associated with the Trump administration? Right? I mean, no, not if you have a good job. But some people do. Okay, so some people would do, but you also pay the price for that. So the idea is that we all have to. So when atheists then say this atheist who, in the sense, called himself indicting God. Okay, fine, you're indicting God, but he's still God. That you're going to answer to him. Now, these principalities and powers. Notice he says right here, and this idea that God has so much that he's doing. You cannot intelligently indict God because you don't have all the information. In our judicial system, one of the reasons why cases take time. So let's say you are accused and then you are charged with a crime. Okay. It takes time for the both parties to get their act together. They have to gather information. And if you're in larger jurisdiction, it takes more time because they have more cases, right? But you have to get information. We just had a horrific shooting in the news just recently. But so then the first day you always have so much misinformation because partly news people want to just get something out there. They want to be the first to get something out there. And even if they're wrong, they don't care if they're wrong. They're just going to spew it out. But then as time moves on and more information moves on, it comes in, you get the picture. And sometimes, bad things happen, right? Sometimes bad things happen and you don't have all the information. And you certainly can't trust your first report. And this is whatever news you want to go. There's a police shooting. So what happens if a police shootings? If you have a police shooting and if the information comes out, it's a white cop with a black cop, it's going to have so much momentum before the actual facts actually come out. And again, whether it's good or bad. In other words, it takes time. That's my point. So the reason why I'm saying that is that you can't come to a conclusion. This is why you have courts, because the courts, you have now the court of public opinion, which is, so unreliable. And then you have the actual court that's going to have actual facts. And that's always different when you put somebody on trial. But you can't judge, and that's the point. You can't judge. One of the most famous trials, the O.J. Simpson trial. And I'm using that because that's even to this day, it's a sore spot for some people because they say he was guilty. They say he got away with murder. And unless you sat, I think it was over a year in that trial, hearing the evidence, you cannot intelligently say one way or the other that he was either guilty or innocent, unless you heard the evidence. There were the news reports every day where people said, oh man, the prosecutors had a mountain of evidence, but you also had the defense that kind of whittled that evidence down. And then in the end, what the jury took into the jury room to deliberate, is what matters. You would have the judge that would say, here's the evidence that you have to make your case. In other words, if you're going to find him guilty, you have to have this evidence. You cannot use whatever evidence from that we outside from the news reports was listening to. If you heard where the police officer, use the N words, well, the judge might have said, well, you can't use that as any to make a conviction. So okay, throw that out. You can't use that. Now we heard it, and we was like, oh man, guilty. No. So again, the evidence. And I'm saying all of that to try to paint a picture that before you can indict, you have to have the evidence. So when people indict God, you don't have all the evidence. See, you don't have all the evidence. Now, why do I say that? Listen to what he says right here, verse 10. This is so God's multifaceted wisdom. So you don't have all that information to be able to say God is right, God is wrong, God is unjust, God is just. You don't have all the information. And then notice what he says right here, that he's making it known to the authorities in the heavens. So you have now an entire realm that's going on out there that you don't know about. There's a lot we don't know. We have a tidbit. We have what God wants us to know, but we don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of what, in other words, we don't know enough to be able to intelligently indict God. And this is why the Bible tells us that in the end, there are judgments. There is the great white throne judgment. And in the end, you're going to hear God's judgment. People say, well, is it right for God to send little old grandma who all she did was bake sugar cookies with her grandkids, right? And that God's going to judge her and send her to hell? God can't be that just. Well, again, you don't know the evidence that God is going to present at the great white throne judgment. You don't know what God knows. That God is going to say, here's why. And then he's going to reveal things. So think about this. You have enough reasoning that you can start with yourself. I can start with myself. That if God says, do you really want to open the books? And by books, let's open your thoughts, your motive. Let's open things you did from the motive standpoint. Now, everybody can't see those things, but let's God is going to go through all of that. So my point is that there's so much we don't know. Okay, there's so much we don't know. So now God's wisdom and what he did. And then you can say why he did things. Okay. We ask simple questions because we're limited to the scope of our finite minds. So we're limited. So when a person says, when he says, well, God ordered God ordered the murders of innocent kids. He's cruel. Okay. Do you have enough information to be able to put God on trial? Only in fantasy. Only in fantasy. So he says, this is so God's multifaceted wisdom, verse 10 again, may be known through the church. Now, this statement, through the church, so think about this. We see the purpose of the church. And this is kind of crazy, right? Because God is through the church revealing his wisdom not just to the world, but notice to the rulers and authorities in the heavens. That's heavy. So then we can ask the question, why? Why, God? Why are you doing that? I don't have enough information to make a judgment on that. But God is doing it. So then verse 11 said, this is according to his eternal purpose accomplished in the Messiah, Jesus our Lord. Okay, so let's go back to these authorities in the heavens. So the authorities, there is a world out there. Let me skip down to chapter 10. Let's jump to chapter 10 because it's going to be a while before we get there. So let's look at chapter 10 and let's look at chapter 6, verse 10. And he says, finally be strengthened by the Lord in his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can, get this, stand against the tactics of the devil. For our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the world powers of this darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. So here again, Paul gives further insight to this spiritual battle. That there is a structure out here. There is a kingdom, an organized kingdom. It was not just ghosts and goblins kind of running around, spooking people. There is a structured kingdom. Now, we can't see that kingdom. But notice, what we do see is the effect of the kingdom. So notice what he says. Our battle, right? So there's a battle. Notice, it's not against flesh and blood. So when you think about people, he said, that's not where your battle is. That's not the problem. So notice rulers and authorities, powers, and then spiritual forces in the heavens. The spiritual powers of darkness in the heavens. So here's the interesting thing here, Revelation, that Satan has a kingdom. And there is a kingdom. There is a spiritual war. There is a spiritual battle going on in the spiritual realm. So let's talk about this, because with our physical senses, we do not see this invisible world. We don't see it. And this is amazing. We don't feel it. We don't touch it. And I know a lot of times people will say, I sense things. And to a degree, here's the thing here. I'm not saying you don't. Sometimes we may have an inkling that something is wrong. Then people could say that there's something wrong. The problem is that you can't put on glasses here, right? You can't put on the spiritual glasses, right? You can't put on the spiritual glasses, and now I can see what's going on in the spiritual realm. Okay, these are just actual. I think both. Not even these are. I think reading glasses. But anyway, okay, and so we, even though our spirits are alive unto God, we still cannot access the spiritual realm through our spirits. Can't explain why. But if you remember, we are spirit, we have a soul, and we live in the body. Now, when we think about this makeup, you can say that there are three realms in which the human exists. There's the spiritual, the spirit man, the inward man. In the Bible, in the simplest terms, says there's an inner man and then there's an outer man. The outer man is our flesh. And our flesh, okay, let me come out of this because we're going to come back to this next week. But okay, our inward man, and then our outer man. I'm going to pull up a chart that I came. Our inward man, I'm going to say, is our spirit and our soul. And our outer man, here we go. Our outer man. So this is just kind of some visual. Our spirit, soul, and body. So in 2 Corinthians, it also identifies as our inner man versus our outer man. Our outer man is our body. Okay, here's another. And then here's another chart. So our spirit, our body, through our five senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. We contact the physical world around us. We are made aware of the physical world, right? All of these: taste, hearing, taste, touch, smell. Now, our inward man is our spirit and soul. So when we die, our spirit and soul is separated from our bodies. When we die, so Paul put it this way: to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. Our inward man, he said, is being renewed day by day, but our outward man is decaying. It's decaying. Well, I know that. I'm older. I can't move like I once could move. Okay. And so our inward man, okay. Now, what is the inward man? That's spirit man. We got a glimpse of that. For example, when Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration and Elijah and Moses showed up. Moses had been there some 1,500 years. Elijah had been there some 800 years. So what were we looking at? What were Peter and them looking at? What is it that they were seeing? It wasn't seeing their bodies. Their bodies were dead, rotted, gone. They were seeing their inward man, their spirit. Now, the spirit, and I'll stop here because I'm out of time. I'm going to pick up with this. And again, I'm going to go through this slowly because, again, this revelation. See, remember, all this comes through the revelation that Paul gave. This mystery that we're able to, and it's multifaceted. Think about this. It's multifaceted. I'll pick up with this next Tuesday night. And don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. As always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you next Tuesday.